Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Kitabul Birr wa Sila wal Adaab, and we are on the long hadith about seeking guidance, food, drink, and clothing from Allah. Just remember, when it comes to seeking these economic needs, they are done in three ways. Firstly, verbally, so you make dua. Secondly, to be righteous, because righteousness is a means by which the rizq or provisions are opened for you. And thirdly, by actually going out and working for it. These are three essential pillars by which you seek your provision from Allah Jalla wa Ala. Then he goes on to say that you sin by night and by day, and I forgive all sins. So seek forgiveness from me and I will forgive you. So when you commit sins, it's not just about asking Allah to forgive you. Rather, this dua needs to be accompanied with regret over what you have done and a firm resolution not to repeat that sin. The true tawbah has 5 components. Number 1, that it should be solely for Allah Jalla wa Ala, not because somebody forces you or you feel the pressure to do it, or perhaps you're doing it to show off. Tawbah is an ibadah and it must be done solely for Allah. Secondly, that you feel regret over what you have done. So you have to feel in your heart that it was an evil deed which you fell into and that you should not have. So this regret is a feeling that you should not have fallen into that particular sin. Thirdly, is to stop committing that sin. So this would be completely opposite to continuing to commit that sin. And if this sin involves the rights of other people, then they have to be restored. If it involves ghiba, backbiting, then as a recompense you speak good about that person in front of the same people you were backbiting. But you do not need to go to him, meaning the one whom you were backbiting, and seek forgiveness from him. No, you do not need to, even if it has been suggested. Just a note, if the person you were backbiting knows you were backbiting him, then in a case like this you would need to seek forgiveness from him because you have violated his rights. If he will not forgive you unless you give him some wealth, then so be it. Make sulh with him, reconciliation. Then fourthly, a resolution not to return to that sin in the future. If it so happens that in the future you fall into that sin again, then upon you is a new tawbah. But if you fall into that sin again, it does not mean that your previous tawbah is undone. All it means is that you just require a new tawbah, but your previous tawbah is still accepted. Even if you repeat the sin 100 times, it does not mean that the 100 tawbahs that you made are all useless or gone in vain. No. The 5th condition, it must be done in the proper time. That is to say, before your death. When your death approaches you, or that you are in the throes of your death, then your tawbah would not avail. The Prophet taught us that the tawbah is accepted as long as the soul does not reach the throat, as it is being taken out. As for those people on whom the punishment descends after they belied the Prophet, then when they see the punishment, then their tawbah would not be accepted, just as what happened to Fir'aun and other than him. And it can also be before the sun rises from the west, because if that happens, then even if you are fully alive and in no danger of death, if that happens, then the tawbah will not be accepted. And also, with tawbah you can turn your evil into good deed and actually raise yourself in status, just like what happened with Adam alayhi salam. Allah teaches us, وَعَصَى آدَمُ رَبَّهُ فَغَوَى. And Adam disobeyed his Rabb and he went astray. But then immediately he made tawbah, and Allah Jalla wa Ala goes on to say in the next ayah of Surah Taha, ثُمَّ اجْتَبَاهُ رَبُّهُ فَتَابَ عَلَيْهِ وَهَدَى. Then Allah chose him, ijtibah, accepted his tawbah and guided him. So Adam alayhi salam became a better person after his sin because of his tawbah. He became mujtaba, chosen, whereas he was not that before his sin. And this is so because Allah Jalla wa Ala is more pleased and happier with the tawbah of his servant than a man who is on his camel in a desert and his camel runs away, and on his camel are his food and drink, and there's no way for him to reach home. So he sits in a shade waiting for death to come to him because he knows it's all over. Then behold, his camel has returned back to him, standing in front of him, and he takes hold of the reins and he shouts out, Allahumma anta abdi wa ana rabbuk. O Allah, you are my servant and I am your Rabb. أخطأ من شدة الفرح. He made a mistake due to the severity of his joy. So this joy was so much that it actually intoxicated him. He did not know what he was saying. He uttered words of kufr, but he was not aware. because of the severity of his joy. But the Prophet says in the hadith that Allah is even more joyous. So just like the camel returned back to its owner, when you make tawbah, you return back to Allah Jalla wa Ala. So just ponder over the beautiful parable that is given in the hadith. And that particular hadith is also due to come up. Then the hadith goes on to say, O my servants, you will not reach a state where you could harm me, nor will you reach a state where you could benefit me. And the reason for this is because Allah Jalla wa Ala is ghaniyun. He stands in no need of anyone. So people making ibadah will not benefit Allah, and people committing sins will not harm Allah. Rather, the harm and benefit is only on the people themselves. And he goes on to say, if the first of you and the last of you, the ins and the jinn of you, were to be like the most pious man from you, this would not increase my dominion in aught. And likewise, if they were the most evil of people, it will not decrease Allah's dominion in aught. The whole dominion belongs to Allah Jalla wa Ala, regardless of what the people do. This is how he says, إِن تَكْفُرُوا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ عَنْكُمْ وَلَا يَرْضَى لِعِبَادِهِ الْكُفْرَ وَإِن تَشْكُرُوا يَرْضَهُ لَكُمْ. If you make kufr, then Allah does not need you, and He is not happy with kufr for His servants. But if you are grateful, He will be content for you. So He will be pleased with your gratitude. So simply put, whatever the people do does not have an effect on what Allah Jalla wa Ala owns. Also, he says that if everyone from the jinn and the ins were to stand in one plane and ask him, and he were to give everyone exactly what they wanted, this will not decrease what Allah has in aught. It will only decrease as much as a needle decreases the level of ocean if dipped into it. That is to say, the level of the ocean would not change. And we learn lastly in the hadith that it is our actions He will repay us for. So in this there is an encouragement to perform righteous deeds. So if you find Allah repaying you with good, then praise Allah, because Allah has granted you the tawfiq to perform righteousness. But if you find evil, that is to say punishment, then blame only yourself, as you did not use your free will in the way that will benefit you. The next hadith of the chapter, from Jabir ibn Abdullah, that the Prophet said, اتقوا الظلم فإن الظلم ظلمات يوم القيامة واتقوا الشح فإن الشح أهلك من كان قبلكم حملهم على أن سفكوا دماءهم واستحلوا محارمهم. Beware of dhulm, because it will be darkness on Yawm al-Qiyamah. And beware of stinginess, because it was stinginess that destroyed those before you. It made them spill each other's blood and take other people's wealth. So first of all, we need to know that dhulm means naqs, a decrease. As in, كِلْتَ الْجَنَّتَيْنِ آتَتْ أُكُلَهَا, both of the gardens gave their fruits. وَلَمْ تَظْلِمْ مِنْهُ شَيْئًا, no garden gave a shortfall. No garden made dhulm. So dhulm in the Sharia is of two types. Dhulm, which is pertaining to the rights of Allah. The greatest of dhulm here would be shirk. And any time you disobey the commandments of Allah Jalla wa Ala, do that which is haram or not do that which is wajib, you are making dhulm on your own self. وَمَن يَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَ اللَّهِ فَقَدْ ظَلَمَ نَفْسَهُ. Whoever oversteps the limits of Allah has oppressed his own self. And then you can have dhulm against other people, and this revolves around their wealth, their own self, and their honor, as we spoke a bit about this before. And on Yawm al-Qiyamah, it will be dhulumat. Notice the root letters are the same, dhalama, because dhulm is darkness, and you will not find anyone to help you before Allah Jalla wa Ala. Allah teaches us, وَمَا لِلظَّالِمِينَ مِنْ حَمِيمٍ وَلَا شَفِيعٍ يُطَاعٍ. The Zalimin will not have any close friend, nor any intercessor who will be obeyed. Then he goes on to mention ash-shuh, which is being eager to have more and more wealth. It says because shuh destroyed those who were before you. How so? It says it made them shed blood, all for wealth and materialistic gains. You would kill another human being. وَاسْتَحَلُّوا مَحَارِمَهُمْ. They would take other people's sacred wealth. All wealth of other people is sacred, and you will just make it halal for yourself. Why? Because of shuh, eagerness to gain more and more. So this could be whether invading other people's homes, or perhaps invading another country, or perhaps lying in wait, as what the Qutta'u Tariq do. The highwaymen lie in wait, they stop the traveller and take their wealth. They may even kill them. So in this valuable hadith, the Prophet warns us from dhulm and shuh, two evil qualities. So dhulm is when you transgress against someone else, and shuh is where you desire what the other person has. And all of it is haram, because all of it leads to much corruption in the land. وَمَنْ يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Whoever is saved from the shuh of his own self, then they are the successful ones. So that means if you're not saved from the shuh, then you are not from the successful ones. Also in the chapter, Salim reports from his father that the Prophet said, الْمُسْلِمُ أَخُو الْمُسْلِمِ لَا يَظْلِمُهُ وَلَا يُسْلِمُهُ مَنْ كَانَ فِي حَاجَةِ أَخِيهِ كَانَ اللَّهُ فِي حَاجَتِهِ وَمَنْ فَرَّجَ عَنْ مُسْلِمٍ كُرْبَةً فَرَّجَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُ بها كربة من كرب يوم القيامة ومن ستر مسلما ستره الله يوم القيامة. The Muslim is the brother of a Muslim. He does not make dhulm upon him, does not oppress him, neither does he deliver him, that is to say, deliver him to his enemies, and thereby he will leave him in the lurch. But rather what is upon him is to defend his brother from his enemies. This is similar to the previous hadith where the Prophet said, لا يظلمه ولا يخذله ولا يحقره. He does not make dhulm upon him, neither does he leave him in the lurch, khudlan, and neither does he belittle him. And he goes on to say, whoever meets the needs of his brother, Allah will meet his needs. Poetic justice, of course. So in this there is an encouragement to help others, because then Allah Jalla wa Ala will help you when you need it. And he goes on to say, whoever relieves a Muslim from hardship, then Allah will relieve him from the hardship on Yawm al-Qiyamah. And whoever covers a Muslim, meaning does not expose his sins, then Allah will conceal him on Yawm al-Qiyamah, meaning conceal his sins from the rest of mankind on Yawm al-Qiyamah. So again, this is poetic justice. And this hadith really encapsulates the spirit of Islamic brotherhood. And the next hadith from Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, أَتَدْرُونَ مَا الْمُفْلِسِ. Do you know who the bankrupt is? They said, the muflis is the one who does not have a dirham or any provisions. The Prophet said, إِنَّ الْمُفْلِسَ مِنْ أُمَّتِي يأتي يوم القيامة بصلاة وصيام وزكاة ويأتي قد شتم هذا وقذف هذا وأكل مال هذا وسفك دم هذا وضرب هذا فيعطى من حسناته وهذا من حسناته فإن فنيت حسناته قبل أن يقضى ما عليه أخذ من خطاياهم فطرحت عليه ثم طرح في النار. The bankrupt one from my ummah is going to come on Yawm al-Qiyamah having performed salah and siyam and zakah. But he will come having abused this person, made qadhaf on the other person, consumed the wealth of the other person, spilled the blood of this other person, having beaten this other person. So all of these people will be given from his good deeds, each respectively. And if his good deeds run out before the judgment has been passed, then their evil deeds will be taken and thrown on him, and then he will be thrown into the fire. We take from the hadith that the Prophet is asking a question, and this is a good way to teach people, to get them thinking about a concept. So this is not a question of inquiry, it's a question of examination, which also serves the purpose of getting them to think about this concept and prepare them for the knowledge which is coming their way. Now here the Sahaba answered correctly. Linguistically, that is exactly what a muflis is. He has no dirham, no any provision, he's bankrupt. But the Prophet intends the technical Shar'i sense. And so he goes on to explain. So this muflis comes on Yawm al-Qiyamah with many good deeds, but he has oppressed others in all various different ways. They will all take his good deeds. So he will become bankrupt in that he will have no good deeds. This is the true bankruptcy. This hadith is not to be understood that he will be thrown into the fire forever. As long as he is a Muslim, he will exit the fire. And we take on Yawm al-Qiyamah, there will not be any currency with which you deal with. It will only be good deeds and evil deeds. The next hadith in the chapter, from Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, لَتُؤَدُّنَّ الْحُقُوقَ إِلَىٰ أَهْلِهَا يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ حَتَّى يُقَادَ لِلشَّاةِ الْجَلْحَاءِ مِنَ الشَّاةِ الْقَرْنَاءِ. Anyone who has a claim on another will receive his claim on Yawm al-Qiyamah, so much so that the hornless sheep will be able to take revenge on the horned sheep. So this hadith beautifully tells us that everything will come out in the wash on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Any injustice, any oppression will be avenged. Any rights, like financial rights, which people had over others, they will be returned. The scales must be balanced. And to illustrate this point, the Prophet gives a vivid example that the hornless sheep which was headbutted in this world by a horned sheep will be able to take revenge on the horned sheep, even though the sheep do not enter Jannah or Jahannam. But Yawm al-Qiyamah will be a place of extreme justice, such that even with animals, justice will be administered. Also in the chapter from Abu Musa, that the Prophet said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ يُمْلِي لِلظَّالِمِ فَإِذَا أَخَذَهُ لَمْ يُفْلِتْ ثم قرأ وكذلك أخذ ربك إذا أخذ القرى وهي ظالمة إن أخذه أليم شديد. Allah Jalla wa Ala prolongs the life or the time limit for the oppressor, but when he seizes him, he will not let him go. Then he recited the ayah, and thus is the seizure of your Rabb when he seizes a town which is oppressive. Verily, the punishment of your Rabb is severe and painful. And this is the plot of Allah Jalla wa Ala against the zalim, in that He gives him respite. And this is not to his advantage, rather this is to his detriment, because it will only prolong him in his oppression. Why does that matter? Well, because then a greater punishment will be justified against him. So Allah Jalla wa Ala gives respite to the kuffar such that their sins will pile up. As He says, وَلَا يَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَنَّمَا نُمْلِي لَهُمْ خَيْرٌ لِأَنفُسِهِمْ إِنَّمَا نُمْلِي لَهُمْ لِيَزْدَادُوا إِثْمًا وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ. We only give them respite so that they increase in their sins and they will have a humiliating chastisement. As for the ayah, then Allah Jalla wa Ala says this about seizing a town after He spoke about the previous nations of Nuh alayhi salam, Ad, Thamud, the people of Shu'aib and the people of Lut, all disobeyed, all destroyed. Thus is the seizure of your Rabb when He seizes a town when it is oppressing. His seizure is painful and severe. And the greatest dhulm is kufr, without a doubt, because this is oppression on your own self. If Allah Jalla wa Ala punishes the zalim in this world, it might be that He takes admonition, takes heed and stops his dhulm. But Allah Jalla wa Ala has something else planned for him. Such a person's fate is sealed, and so Allah Jalla wa Ala allows him to commit this dhulm, kufr and all these evil actions, and to increase in his sin, so that his punishment will be intensified. And everyone can commit sin, so no one should feel safe from the plan of Allah Jalla wa Ala. أَفَأَمِنُوا مَكْرَ اللَّهِ فَلَا يَأْمَنُ مَكْرَ اللَّهِ إِلَّا الْقَوْمُ الْخَاسِرُونَ. Only the losing people feel safe from the plan of Allah Jalla wa Ala. We ask Allah Jalla wa Ala to keep us safe from His plan of destruction. Let's take the next chapter about helping your brother whether he is an oppressor or oppressed. From Jabir ibn Abdullah, he says that two young men, one from the Muhajir and the other from the Ansar, fell into a dispute. The Muhajir called his fellow Muhajirun, Ya lal Muhajirin, and the other one called his people, Ya lal Ansar. And to this the Prophet came out because he heard this commotion, and he said, Ma hadha da'wa ahl al-jahiliyyah. What is this call of the people of foolishness? The people said, it's nothing so serious. These two men fell into a dispute, and one of them struck the back of the other. Thereupon the Prophet said, فَلَا بَأْسَ, then there is no problem. وَلْيَنْصُرِ الرَّجُلُ أَخَاهُ ظَالِمًا أَوْ مَظْلُومًا إِنْ كَانَ ظَالِمًا فَلْيَنْهَ فَإِنَّهُ لَهُ نَصْرٌ وَإِنْ كَانَ مَظْلُومًا فَلْيَنْصُرْ. He said, there is no problem, but a man should help his brother, whether his brother is a zalim or madloom, oppressor or oppressed. If he is an oppressor, then forbid him from his oppression, and this will be helping him. But if he is oppressed, then let him help him. In another narration about this call of Jahiliyyah, the Prophet said, دَعُوهَا فَإِنَّهَا مُنْتَنَا, leave it because it stinks. This narration is interesting because we find one of them calls the Muhajirun, Ya lal Muhajirin, and the other one calls the Ansar, Ya lal Ansar. These two words, the Muhajirun and Ansar, are used in the Quran. وَالسَّابِقُونَ الْأَوَّلُونَ مِنَ الْمُهَاجِرِينَ وَالْأَنصَارِ. The first and foremost from the Muhajirin and the Ansar. So there is nothing wrong with these particular words and to use these words to describe a group of people. The Quran does it, so of course it's okay. But the Prophet did not approve here. Why? Because of the reason why these titles, Muhajirun and Ansar, were used. They were used for a hizbi, or a sectarian reason. that the Muhajirun will help each other and then the Ansar will help each other. This is sectarian dispute. These titles are being used for sectarianism, and that splits the Ummah up. Coming out with the labels to describe people can be divided broadly into three categories. Number one, that which is praised, and this is the title which will distinguish the Muslim from the Kafir. So Muslim or Mu'min, these are titles to which you owe your allegiance to al-wala wal-bara. You have allegiance to the title of Muslim and Mu'min. You have bara, freedom from the title of Kuffar, Kafir, or any other Kafir title, like Jew or Christian, agnostic, and so on. Then we have the blameworthy type, and these are titles which contain false aqidah and practices, such as these titles which the Sufiya come out with, and other titles which practice bid'ah, the titles of groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir, Ikhwanul Muslimin, and there are many other titles and names of different groups. No doubt every generation will have a new group coming out. And we say any title on which wala and bara revolve around, so you have allegiance only to that particular title or that group to the exclusion of other Muslims. So if another Muslim is not allied to that particular title of yours, then you will have bara from him. You will feel free of him, and you will have this us and them mentality within the Muslims. This is where Allah Jalla wa Ala says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ فَرَّقُوا دِينَهُمْ وَكَانُوا شِيَعًا لَسْتَ مِنْهُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ إِنَّمَا أَمْرُهُمْ إِلَى اللَّهِ ثُمَّ يُنَبِّئُهُمْ بِمَا كَانُوا يَفْعَلُونَ. Those who broke their deen into different sects, you, O Prophet, have nothing to do with them. Their matter is with Allah, and He will inform them of what they used to do. So these will be those Muslims who come out with new titles and groups, let's say, and they owe their allegiance to that group to the exclusion of other Muslims. They will often warn each other against those Muslims not part of their sect. This is plain Hizbiyah or sectarianism, and every sect claims to be upon the truth, of course. The Jahiliyyah mentality can come disguised as the Sunnah, so we will find people who have allegiance to being a Salafi, that is to say, following the Sunnah of the first three generations. And so they will ally themselves to all those who label themselves with this title and are part of their group, following the same scholars, and they will feel free of anyone who is not part of that group. So they will have this us and them mentality. And this is plain Jahiliyyah, disguised as a Sunnah. Rather, what is obligatory is to follow the method of the Salaf, that is the first three generations, not to form a sect in which you owe your allegiance to these particular people, following particular scholars, and having an us and them mentality between Muslims. That is no different to what we see happening in this hadith. Ya al-Muhajirin, Ya al-Ansar. The names there's nothing wrong with, but they were used for sectarian reason, for wala and bara, the us and them attitude. And so the Prophet said, leave it because it stinks, and he called it the da'wah of Jahiliyyah. So likewise, with any group which has a quote-unquote us and them mentality within the Muslims, then this is from the Jahiliyyah. The us and them mentality is only ever permissible between a Muslim and a Kafir. There you have to have an us and them mentality. Within the Muslims, if ever you have a group which has an us and them mentality, then know that it is upon Jahiliyyah, even if it calls itself Salafiyah or whatever Islamic name it wants to call itself. Ikhwanul Muslimin, these, if you like, righteous sounding names, do not be fooled. It's the meaning and methodology behind them which really counts. Okay, and then you have the third type of naming or titling, and this is the permissible type. These are names and titles just for ta'rif, or just to recognize a particular group. Allah Jalla wa Ala says, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. We have made you nations and tribes that you may recognize each other. So for recognition, this is okay. Somebody may say, I am a Hanbali. So we recognize him to be following the Hanbali madhab. We may say, I am a Hanafi, and so on. Or you may title him Ahmed as-Somali, Ahmed from Somalia, as opposed to Ahmed from India. So that would be Ahmed al-Hindi. So these are titles for ta'rif, just to recognize a person. Likewise, we find many Islamic charities. They have their own particular titles. This is just for recognition purposes. These do not have wala and bara. the us and them mentality. So charities and organizations which work for a particular cause, let's say a da'wah organization, let's say a charity organization, and so on, they will have their particular names. But of course you have to have names just for recognition purposes. These names are not used as a wala and bara purpose. Like we said, wala and bara can only ever be between a Muslim and a kafir. One might ask, but do you give wala to a person of bid'ah? We say we give wala to every Muslim, but the level of wala is proportional to the level of the sunnah which he's practicing. So the more a person practices the sunnah, the more wala you have with him, and the less a person practices the sunnah, the less wala you have with him. There is always a level of wala or allegiance or alliance with a fellow Muslim. The person you have zero wala with is a kafir, and only a kafir. So these are the three categories of titles and naming. We also learn from the hadith vitally that you help your brother whether he's an oppressor or oppressed, and the method of doing that is clearly stated in the hadith. Let us move to the next chapter about the mutual mercy and affection and support of the mu'mineen to each other. From Abu Musa, the Prophet said, Al-mu'minu lil-mu'min kal-bunyan yashuddu ba'dahu ba'dah. Believers to each other are like buildings, one part reinforces the other. And in some narrations, the Prophet clasped his fingers together, or intertwined his fingers, to illustrate the building supporting each other. Now that is how the mu'min ought to be with the fellow mu'mineen, like buildings. Of course, nowadays we see much disunity, and this building has really been turned to rubble. Why is this? Because of the lack of iman. As long as a community has iman, then necessarily it will be like this building supporting each other. But when you lose iman, then you will lose the unity. That's why you'll notice the word mu'min is used, not the word Muslim. You will often find much mutual jealousy and envy, such that if one Muslim or a da'i to Islam, let's say, makes a mistake, you will find another da'i who feels jealous to advertise the mistakes and to really character assassinate the other Muslim. Out of hasad, jealousy and envy, these are traits of the Yahud, of course, but you find them rampant amongst Muslimin in this day and age. The munafiqun are going to be the one who will feel happy if another mu'min makes a mistake or slips up somewhere. Without a doubt, the munafiqun and the Yahud will be happy, but amazingly and surprisingly, we find Muslims advertising other Muslims' mistakes and downfall and character assassinating them, rather than focusing on the mistake itself or the bad opinion itself and rectifying that and making plain what is right and that which is wrong. Instead of focusing on the idea, they want to focus on the character of the person and really character assassinate to bring them down to their lowly level. Also in the chapter, Nu'man ibn Bashir reports that the Prophet said, مثل المؤمنين في توادهم وتراحمهم وتعاطفهم مثل الجسد إذا اشتكى منه عضو تداعى له سائر الجسد بالسهر والحمى. The parable of the mu'mineen in their mutual love and mutual mercy and mutual compassion is like the parable of one whole body. If one part of it complains due to illness, then the rest of the body will also complain with sleepless nights and fever. So from this hadith, we can take the benefit that if any community of Muslim from anywhere in the world is suffering, then if you are also not suffering with them, then you are not a true mu'min. That is to say, you have a deficient iman. Because only the kafir will not feel the pain of a mu'min. That is obvious enough. But if you too are not feeling the pain of another mu'min, then what does that say about you? How are you any different to the kafir? And we take from this hadith that the mu'minun have mutual love and mercy and compassion. So if you find a mu'min dealing with another mu'min without any love and without any mercy and without any compassion, then you can be sure that he has deficient iman. Let's take the next chapter about abusing each other. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, Al-mustabbani ma qala fa'ala al-badi'i ma lam ya'tadil madlum. When two people abuse each other, then the sin is on the one who started it, as long as the one who is responding back does not transgress the limits. The word sab means abuse. It is to say something to someone else what they dislike. Ghiba is to say something about someone else, what they dislike, in their absence. So the difference between ghiba and sab is with the sab he is present, and with the ghiba he is not present. Normally if you abuse someone, they'll abuse you back, and they have the right to do that. Allah says, فَمَنْ اعْتَدَى عَلَيْكُمْ فَاعْتَدُوا عَلَيْهِ بِمِثْلِ مَا اعْتَدَى عَلَيْكُمْ. Whoever transgresses against you, then transgress against him back, similar to that which he did to you. So the hadith tells us that the sin of this abuse is on the one who started it. But is it better to abuse this person back, or is it better to keep patient and forgive him and overlook? Definitely the latter. And especially if you are fasting, you must not reply back, due to the hadith, فَإِنْ شَاتَمَهُ أَحَدٌ أَوْ قَاتَلَهُ فَلْيَقُلْ إِنِّي صَائِمٌ. If one abuses you or fights you, then tell him, I am fasting. That is to say, the only reason why I will not retaliate is because of the fasting. I want to be on my best behavior. And the better behavior, in all cases, fasting or not, is to forgive and overlook. But if you are going to forgive and overlook and not respond, then you do need to let him know that you are able to respond. So it's not like you are not responding out of weakness. No, you must not show yourself to be weak. Rather, you always show yourself to be aziz, honored, mighty and strong. So let them know why you're not responding. Let them know that you are better than just playground insults. We take from the hadith that if somebody does something that causes a loss, but that action of his is directly based on a particular reason or a cause, then the blame of the loss lies on the one who caused the direct action. In this hadith, the one who replies back is undertaking the direct action of abusing another person. Now, abusing another person is sinful. So is the sin on him because he undertook the direct action of abuse? The answer is yes, he undertook the direct action of abuse. That much is clear. However, that direct action was a direct result of the sabab, of the cause. What was the cause? The first man abusing him. Therefore, the sin lies on the mutasabbib, the one who caused the second action. To give another example, a qadi judges that a person should be executed due to the evidence presented to him in the court. Two just men have testified to a particular sin which the accused has committed, and so the qadi judges that the accused be sentenced to death. Then afterwards it becomes known that these two men lied in their oath. Of course, the accused is now executed. This is a great miscarriage of justice. So who's guilty here? Well, the first question, who undertook the direct action? Well, the executioner with the sword or with the axe. He undertook the direct action of killing the accused. So should he be retaliated against? Well, the answer is no, because his action was as a direct result of a previous action, which was the judgment of the qadi. So perhaps the qadi should be now executed in retaliation. But we cannot say that. Why? Because the judgment of the qadi was as a direct result of the testimony of these two liars. So the buck stops at these two men who testified falsely. They are the ones who are going to be executed. However, on the other hand, if the mubashara, the direct action, is not a direct result of the sabab, the cause, then the mubashir, the one undertaking the direct action, is guilty. For example, person A digs a hole in the pavement, a dangerous hole, and then person B comes along and pushes an innocent person into that hole, and the innocent person dies. Who is responsible? We say here, person B is responsible because of the mubashara. He undertook the direct action. But what about person A? Did he not dig this hole? So is he also not responsible for this dangerous action? The answer here is no, because person B directly undertook that evil action, so he's responsible. And person B's action was not directly linked to person A's action, in that person B did not have to push the innocent bystander into the hole, but he did. So this action was independent of person A's action. So in our scenario here, the mubashara was not as a direct result of the sabab. Another example, with a different ruling here now, is that if a person throws another in a lion's den and the lions tear him up and kill him, who's responsible? Well, we just said that the mubashir is responsible, but here the mubashir are the lions. But how can we take them to account? So the answer is here, because we cannot take them to account, the mutasabbib is responsible, the one who is responsible for the cause. That is, the one who threw the innocent person into the lion's den. Even though that person who threw the other was not directly responsible for the death of the innocent, but he was the sabab, he was the cause. So we take him to account simply because we cannot take the lions to account. Okay, so the hadith teaches us that as long as you do not transgress the limit. An example would be, person A says to person B, Ya fasiq, O evildoer. And person B says to A, Ya fasiq kafir, O evildoer kafir. Now he's transgressed the limits. He's made takfir on person A. So how do we understand this hadith? If this second person who makes the i'tida, he transgresses the limits, he has the sin of saying Ya kafir. But the first person who said Ya fasiq, will he be sinful as well for saying Ya fasiq, starting it off? Or do we say that because person B transgressed the limits, person A, with his statement Ya fasiq, is not sinful, and the whole sin of the whole abuse is on person B now? So we have two options. First option is person A is sinful for saying Ya fasiq, and person B is sinful for saying Ya kafir. And the second option is person B is sinful for the whole abuse, and person A is now no longer sinful. Well, the hadith can be understood in both ways. Similar to this discussion will be the hadith As-salawatu al-khamsu wal-jum'atu ila al-jum'ah wa ramadanu ila ramadan mukaffiratun lima baynahunna majtunibat al-kaba'ir. The 5 prayers, the Yawm al-Jum'ah salah, Ramadan to Ramadan, they expiate the sins in between them as long as the major sins are avoided. How do we understand this hadith then? Do we say that if you commit major sins, then your minor sins will not be forgiven as well as your major sins not forgiven? Or do we say that your major sin will not be forgiven but your minor sins will be forgiven? It can be understood both ways again. The majority scholars here say that these actions, these righteous actions, will definitely expiate the minor sins, only they will not expiate the major sins, and that is how they understand this particular hadith. But like we say, it could be understood in the other way, which is to say that if you commit major sins, all of your sins will not be forgiven or expiated from these 3 types of righteous actions, neither the minor sins nor the major sins. Let's take the next chapter about forgiving and being humble. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, ما نقصت صدقة من مال وما زاد الله عبدا بعفو إلا عزة وما تواضع أحد لله إلا رفعه الله. Charity does not decrease wealth, and Allah does not increase a servant who forgives others except in honor. And whoever lowers himself before Allah, then Allah will raise him. You find if you think about giving charity, the shaitan whispers into you and says your wealth will decrease. So what will you do? And he makes you worry. But the Prophet here is telling us it does not decrease it. And the Prophet has spoken the truth, because sometimes it will physically increase your wealth, in that Allah Jalla wa Ala gives you back more. And if that does not happen, then it will increase your wealth in barakah. That is to say, a small amount of wealth lasts you much longer than it ought to, because of the barakah. And especially in Ramadan, the Prophet ﷺ was more generous than swiftly blowing wind. Also, the second point to learn is the one who forgives and overlooks, Allah raises him in izzah, that is honor. So if somebody transgresses against you, you do have the right to retaliate, as we said before, but to forgive is better, and this raises you in respect. Allah teaches us, وَإِنْ عَاقَبْتُمْ فَعَاقِبُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا عُوقِبْتُمْ بِهِ وَلَئِنْ صَبَرْتُمْ لَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لِلصَّابِرِينَ. When you punish someone, then punish them the way they attacked you. But if you are patient, then that is better for those who are patient. And it is funny, most people would think that if you overlook a transgression against you, then this is a show of weakness and humility. And how can you humiliate yourself in front of someone who has transgressed against you? How could you not take revenge? Yet this hadith gives us the complete opposite message. It tells us that Allah Jalla wa Ala will raise you in respect and honor. So forgiveness is not humiliation, rather forgiveness is respect and honor. but it is just that people want to stroke their egos. And the third point is tawadu' lillah. This could be understood in two ways. You are humble to Allah, that is, you obey Him and obey His orders. And the second meaning is that you are humble for the sake of Allah. That is to say, you are humble towards other people, seeking the countenance of Allah Jalla wa Ala. And both meanings are correct, and they will both raise you in status with Allah Jalla wa Ala. But note, being humble towards other people is not because you fear them, and neither because you are trying to appease them, nor that you are trying to gain some wealth. Rather, it is for the sake of Allah Jalla wa Ala. That is to say, it is because Allah commands you to be humble. Also, just a quick point about taking revenge if you're being insulted. Of course, you can take revenge like for like. However, certain matters are off limits. For example, if he makes qadhaf on you, so accuses you of fornication, then you are not allowed to make qadhaf on him, because this is where a had punishment is applicable. Or if he outright lies against you, so for example claims you did something which you did not do, then you are not allowed to lie against him. So you are not allowed to make a claim about him which is not true. So for example, claiming he did something or he broke the law, for example, where he did not break the law. And another point is, if he insults your parents, you do not insult his parents because his parents are innocent, but you may insult him directly. So know that these three matters are off limits. Okay, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. Who is the bankrupt person both linguistically and in the Shar'i sense? Question number 2. We spoke about the issue of the mubashir and mutasabbib. Recall that matter. Question number 3. What does it mean to be humble for Allah?